Hi, today I'd like to talk to you about another myth in student voice. And this is a myth that if we're getting high satisfaction scores, then everything's fine, when really that's not the case. Because what we're looking for is to really try and get authentic student feedback and try and get away from this culture of just survey lots, get the data, and do very little with it. So, what do I mean by high satisfaction scores can mask other problems? Well, satisfaction scores, the Likert scale, sort of the agree and strongly disagree part, typically range from sort of 60 up to sort of 90% in some courses. Again, depends on the survey, depends on a lot of different things. They're quite high numbers, and they're the numbers we chase. And there's some students in there who are indifferent or neither agree or disagree. But what I really want to uncover is what are the students who are complaining talking about? Because there might be problems going on there with courses and areas of your institution that have very high satisfaction rates that could be easily fixed, or if not fixed early enough, could be real problems. So if instead we look at dissatisfaction instead of satisfaction and measure that, and there's been some work here done by Langen et al. On this, there's a few things that pop up. So if we start flipping those rankings, we can see that some institutions have very high satisfaction, but also high dissatisfaction, right? Proportionally, and very little in the middle. Right? Some institutions may have a lower overall satisfaction, but they have that far lower levels of dissatisfaction. So it's important to look at these things through a different lens sometimes, because while most people might be satisfied, those most likely to be dissatisfied will be students with extra needs or coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And we've got to make sure we're doing everything to make sure they're not being left behind. So, for instance, commuter students, right? How are we treating them? Might be some institutions relatively small in proportion, but what's their satisfaction levels? When we do a proper analysis of the data on a large enough scale, we can actually sort of break these groupings out and actually see that they have real problems. And we see across the board that commuter students, perhaps unsurprisingly, are far more negative and dissatisfied around organization, timetabling, scheduling, things like that. And other sort of smaller groups like mature students, they frequently flag childcare clashes in their free text comments. And these, while they're relatively small groups within the larger cohort of many institutions, are very important groups that we want to be supporting, and again, to sort of support our mission of social mobility in the higher education sector. And if we're looking at satisfaction, they might be lost in the mean. If we're not reading all the comments, if we're not doing a thorough qualitative analysis, then we might not see these issues. So, what can we do to reduce dissatisfaction? So, what we can look at, if we do a substantive analysis of the qualitative comments, we can see what is the relation between positive and negative sentiment, because frequently positive sentiment increases and negative sentiment decreases. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they're pretty independent of each other, and we can look at these areas of dissatisfaction, areas of peaks of negative sentiment, where there might also be relatively high positive sentiment too, and kind of get in there and see what are the problems. And as with all these approaches, you go and read the comments and you find out what the students are actually dissatisfied with. And it helps you sort of tackle some of the blind spots we might see where little pockets of bad practice or not supporting students in the way they need to be supported might be sneaking through in an otherwise very good course or faculty or department. So what we can do to sort of make sure we do this is track dissatisfaction, right? Make it one of the key metrics too. It's maybe not as fun to look at as satisfaction, right? But it's important to know dissatisfaction across all of our cohorts, all of our programs, all our faculties, and see where the issues are. And look into the open comments where we see pockets of dissatisfaction, because students will be telling you exactly what the problem is. And then that leads to the classic you said we did stuff, right? Communication loops, which we talk about all the time. Keep those communication lines open, be transparent, but you've got to know what the problems are, and that comes from the dissatisfaction.